Mike stood in front of Golden College, an elite secondary school with sprawling lawns and towering gates. It was a place for the rich and powerful, the children of CEOs, politicians, and celebrities. Among the students was Mike, a quiet, overweight boy who walked the hallways with his head down, desperately trying to avoid the stares and whispers. Big Mike, as he was called, didn't fit the mold of the Golden College student. He wasn't glamorous or trendy, and his clothes, though clean, were simple and plain. His classmates thought he didn't belong. Rumors swirled that his parents were struggling traders who somehow bribed their way into getting him admitted. But what truly made him a target was his weight. The teasing started subtly, snickering when he entered the classroom, or jokes whispered just loud enough for him to hear. But soon it turned cruel. "Mike, are you sure that chair can carry you?" Bright, the class clown, sneered one day, prompting an eruption of laughter. "Mike must be eating the school fees. That's why his parents can't afford proper clothes," Victor added, his voice dripping with mockery. One day, the hallway was empty except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Mike had stayed behind after school to finish his assignment, hoping the quiet would give him some peace. But as he rounded the corner near the science lab, he felt it, the prickle on the back of his neck. He wasn't alone. "Oi, Big Mike!" A sharp voice rang out, echoing through the hall. He froze. Slowly, he turned, clutching his books tightly against his chest. It was Bright, followed by Victor and two other boys from their class. Their faces were alight with mischief, and in Bright's hand was a half-filled bottle of water, sloshing as he juggled it lazily. "Trouble. Where are you rushing to, Mike? Got a buffet waiting for you at home." Bright sneered, stepping closer. The others snickered, forming a loose circle around him. "I'm just heading out," Mike mumbled, his voice barely audible. His palms were clammy, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure they could hear it. "Oh, you're leaving already? But we were just about to have some fun." Bright grinned wickedly and, without warning, hurled the bottle at Mike's feet. Water splashed onto his shoes and the cuffs of his trousers. The boys howled with laughter. Mike clenched his jaw, biting back the retort that danced on the edge of his tongue. He knew better than to fight back. It only made things worse. "Leave me alone," Mike said quietly, his voice trembling. But they didn't. They never did. "Big Mike," Bright shouted, spreading his arms theatrically. "We've been waiting for you." What's going on?" he managed to whisper. Bright's grin widened. "Oh, nothing much. We just thought you needed a makeover." He held up the ink bottle, and Bright stepped closer, unscrewing an ink bottle. "Hold him still," he commanded, as they sat him down on the grass. Mike thrashed, but it was no use. They pinned his arms as Bright poured the ink over his neatly pressed shirt. The dark liquid seeped into the fabric, staining it beyond repair. The room exploded with laughter. "Look at him now," Victor howled. Big Mike, the walking ink blot. Mike's vision blurred with tears, but they didn't stop there. Simi stood up, holding something in her hand, a bright pink school skirt. "Since you like to cry like a baby, maybe you should dress like one too," she said, tossing it to Bright. "Or, better yet, like a girl." "No. Stop it," Mike yelled, his voice cracking. But they didn't listen. They yanked his trousers off, ignoring his frantic kicks, and forced the skirt onto him. "There you go," Bright announced, stepping back to admire their work. Big Mike the big girl. He spun around to face the rest, arms wide. "Doesn't he look lovely?" They pushed Mike outside when they saw that it was raining heavily. Meanwhile, a beautiful girl named Sara, who couldn't stand what the bullies were doing to Mike, stepped forward and confronted them. She threatened to report their actions to the school authorities, revealing that she already had evidence on her phone. The bullies, visibly shaken by her boldness, quickly scattered and ran away. Mike, however, remained frozen in place. The sky had darkened, and rain began to pour heavily. For Mike, the rain was more than just water. It was a haunting memory. His mother had died during a storm, and every downpour brought back the pain of that loss. As the rain drenched him, he panicked, calling out for his mother, his voice trembling with fear. Seeing his distress, Sara immediately stepped in. She took off her jacket and draped it over him, shielding him from the rain. Then, she gently placed her headphones over his ears, playing soft, calming music. Gradually, Mike's breathing steadied, and the panic in his eyes faded. He looked up at Sara, this unexpected friend who had shown him kindness when he needed it most. The next day, the school was stunned when a fleet of luxurious cars arrived, revealing Mike's father as a wealthy billionaire. He brought police to investigate the bullying and negligence at the school, uncovering that Victor's parents had bribed the principal to shield their son from punishment. Victor and the other bullies were arrested, and the principal resigned in disgrace. Mike's father addressed the school, urging students to stand against bullying and support one another. Sara told Mike that she would always protect him. With her kindness and support, the two quickly became close friends. However, they had to part ways because Mike had to move abroad with his father. Before leaving, Mike gathered all his courage and gave Sara a gentle kiss. He promised her that they would meet again someday. And now, that promise was about to be fulfilled. Many years later, Sara, who used to be very beautiful and popular in school, wasn't considered beautiful anymore and faced a lot of difficulties because of her looks and stress from work. She worked as a waitress after she graduated from school and never had time for herself. She was often treated poorly. Sara's best friend, Becky, was a beautiful hot girl. Although their beauty is different, their friendship is still very good. One day at a party, Sara saves Becky from drowning, but people only paid attention to Becky, making Sara feel invisible. People always see her as the ugly duckling whenever she and Becky were together. One day, Sara went for a job interview. When she arrived, the interviewer questioned her extensively about her experience and why she hadn't been able to hold a job for more than 3 months. Sara responded confidently, explaining that her previous employer had been arrested and the company had abruptly gone bankrupt. Her sincerity prompted laughter from the other candidates. After the interview, to her surprise, she received an email from Mike, her chubby old friend from her past, who mentioned he was back in town and wanted to meet up. He also inquired why she hadn't responded to his previous emails. When Sara arrived at the meeting spot, she mistakenly approached a portly man, thinking he was Mike, her first love from years ago. However, it turned out to be someone else. The man looked at her skeptically and asked if they knew each other. Realizing her error, Sara felt embarrassed. Just then, her phone rang. It was Mike, and at that moment, a handsome man nearby also answered his phone. To Sara's astonishment, the words he spoke perfectly matched the voice she heard through her phone. It turned out that Mike, her once chubby friend, had undergone an incredible transformation and now looked strikingly different. Sara was utterly stunned, and her body froze. The handsome man waved at her, but as he approached, he passed by to greet a beautiful woman standing behind Sara. He didn't recognize Sara, who had once been considered very beautiful herself. The stress from her job had taken a toll on her appearance, and she hadn't had time to care for herself. As she noticed her clothes and her current state, she felt increasingly self-conscious and lacked the courage to call out to Mike. Stunned and feeling out of place, Sara watched as Mike, not recognizing her, walked past her to greet a beautiful woman behind her. Feeling overwhelmed and unworthy because she looked very different from her younger self, Sara retreated to a corner. Later, she met her best friend Becky and shared what had happened. Sara confessed that she felt unworthy of Mike because he remembered her as a beautiful student, and she believed her current appearance would disappoint him. Becky advised Sara to be herself regardless, but Sara continued to feel down about herself. Unable to let Mike wait, Sara asked Becky to pretend to be her since everyone loved Becky. Becky agreed and confidently approached Mike, who greeted her, thinking she was Sara, and gave her a warm hug. From a distance, Sara watched sadly as Mike spoke to Becky, thinking she was Sara. He thanked Becky for bringing light into his dark life and helping him find hope again. After their meal, Mike gave Becky a gift and hugged her tightly. Sara watched them with a heavy heart. That night, back at Sara's house, they opened Mike's gift, a meaningful umbrella. Sara explained to Becky that when they were young, she had used her coat to protect Mike from the rain. Now Mike wanted to be the one to protect her, but Sara felt she couldn't accept this kindness anymore. She told Becky not to contact Mike anymore, and she agreed. She decided to delete Mike's contact details and try to forget him. The next morning, Sara discovered she had passed her job interview. Excited, she went to her new job only to find out that her boss was Mike. Despite trying to avoid him, Mike noticed her strange behavior and called her to his office that evening to bring some files. Sara was so struck by his appearance that she nearly fainted. Mike, misunderstanding her reaction as fear of the dark, gave her headphones to listen to music, hoping to calm her down. Deep inside, Sara wanted to reveal her true identity to Mike. The next day, Sara accidentally spilled water on the floor, and when the manager saw her cleaning it up, she criticized Sara for not fitting in at a fashion magazine because of her looks and outfit. Sara explained that she was hired as a writer, not an office assistant, but the manager wouldn't listen. Mike, concerned about the performance of the branch, called for a meeting and asked for ideas, but he was unsatisfied with the suggestions. When he asked Sara for her ideas, she stammered, and he sent her out of the meeting. Sara wondered if her appearance was the reason Mike couldn't stand her. However, what the staff didn't know was that Mike was not being arrogant. He had come to this branch to save it because it was failing to meet targets, and the headquarters had warned that it might be closed. Sara noticed Mike was cheerful while talking on the phone later, and she suspected he was talking to Becky. She felt even more alone and murmured to herself about her situation. Sara decided she couldn't tolerate the situation any longer. She had earned her position through her own abilities, and while everyone makes mistakes at work, she wondered why Mike seemed to despise her so much. His arrogance continued as he criticized Sara for her stammering speech, calling her amateur and claiming her skills and work style weren't deserving of her name. It turned out that he was particularly harsh because she shared the same name as his first noble love, which made Sara extremely angry. He didn't recognize her and even dared to look down on her. In that case, she decided not to leave the company, but instead to stay close to him every day to drive him crazy. The next day, Sara went to the company without any fear, and in front of her colleagues, she criticized her boss. She said he wasn't handsome, his personality was strange, and he always looked like he was frowning. She didn't realize Mike was standing behind her. When she turned around and saw his face, she screamed loudly. The colleagues who had been chatting with her simply turned a blind eye and walked away, leaving Sara alone with Mike, who didn't seem to care. After the heated confrontation at the office, Sara felt isolated and defeated. Despite her efforts to remain professional, her emotions got the better of her, and her outburst about Mike had worsened the situation. Little did she know, Becky, who had promised to cut ties with Mike, secretly continued to see him. The bond between Sara and Becky, once unbreakable, started to fray as Becky's deception deepened. The next day, Sara confronted Becky. She asked her friend why she had lied, why she had chosen Mike over their friendship. Becky tried to justify her actions, claiming that her feelings for Mike had grown too strong to ignore. Sara listened, her heart sinking with each word. The realization that her closest ally had chosen her first love over their friendship was too much to bear. Meanwhile, when Mike arrived at the company, he continued to push his team to discuss a new idea, but he was unsatisfied with any suggestions until the team leader instructed Sara to set up for the presentation. Nervous, Sara accidentally pointed the LED light directly into Mike's face, and then inadvertently turned on the bright headlights again, causing laughter among her colleagues. Despite the mishap, she successfully managed to get the projector running by the end of the meeting. After the meeting, Mike asked Sara to bring him the report from the day's meeting. Panicked and unsure about some of the specialized terms, Sara sought help from her colleagues, but everyone was too busy to assist. As a result, the report she submitted contained many errors, leading Mike to scold her harshly. He criticized her understanding and insinuated that she must have secured her job through underhanded means. Hurt by his words, Sara explained that she was hired as a writer, but had been mistakenly assigned to work in the management department. She emphasized her efforts to learn fashion terminology and her commitment to her rightful role. But Mike dismissed her explanations, insisting he needed to work with professionals, and in frustration, he threw her reports on the ground and told her to leave, muttering remarks about her competence. He told her she was fired. But later, it was revealed that Sara was not responsible for the document mishap. Another employee confessed to the error. Realizing his mistake, Mike hurried to Sara's house in a taxi to apologize and begged her to return to work. But Sara refused his plea. As Mike stepped outside to catch a taxi back home, it began to rain heavily, triggering a panic attack due to his childhood trauma associated with storms. Frozen in fear, he was startled when Sara came out with the umbrella he had previously given to Becky, using it to shield him from the rain. Surprised and touched, Mike wondered how Sara knew about his fear of storms. The next day, Mike and Becky went out for a meal. As they left the restaurant, it began to drizzle, and Becky joyfully played in the rain, which confused Mike because his first love had always disliked the rain. He recalled earlier conversations where Becky had hesitated in her responses, fueling his suspicions. Meanwhile, Sara woke up early to run errands and pay bills. After shopping and getting her hair done, she returned to work, where her colleagues were impressed by her transformation and newfound confidence. She dedicated herself to learning the business and avoiding past mistakes. Mike noticed her efforts and began to mentor her gently. That evening, Becky arrived at Mike's office for their planned date. Without checking in on her friend Sara, she headed straight to Mike's office. Meanwhile, Sara, exhausted after working tirelessly on a project, had unknowingly left her diary on her desk and fallen asleep. The diary contained intimate details about her past relationship with Mike. When Becky arrived, Mike told her that after finishing a call, he needed to drop Sara off at her house. Becky, uncomfortable with the idea of Mike being alone with Sara, quickly suggested that Sara could take a cab instead. However, Mike insisted on driving her himself. Realizing she needed to act fast, Becky hurried to Sara's desk, woke her up, and relayed Mike's message. Groggy and still half asleep, Sara gathered her things, but left her diary behind. Moments later, Mike walked into Sara's office and asked Becky where Sara was. Becky informed him that she had already left. As Mike glanced around, His eyes fell on the diary lying on the table. Unable to resist, he picked it up and began reading. With each word, shock spread across his face as he realized Sara was the woman he had been searching for all along. Becky, standing nearby, was equally stunned. Realizing she could no longer keep her secrets, Becky admitted everything. She confessed that she had originally met Mike at Sara's request, but her growing feelings for him had complicated things. She had planned to tell him the truth that day, but hadn't expected he would find out in such a way. Desperately, she begged for his forgiveness. But Mike said nothing. Instead, he asked her a single question. "Who is my real Sara?" Becky, with no way out, admitted the truth. "It's Sara," she said. "The girl you always thought so little of." Without another word, Mike left the office, his mind consumed with thoughts of Sara. He felt a mix of anger at himself for not recognizing her sooner and an overwhelming urge to see her. Tears blurred his vision as he drove, each one a reflection of the regret and longing he carried. When Mike arrived at Sara's house, he called out to her, his voice trembling. He used a name only she would recognize, a name from their past. Stunned, Sara realized he knew everything. As she stepped outside, they locked eyes, and in that moment, everything else faded away. They embraced, their hearts pounding in unison, the weight of the years melting into indescribable joy. They had seen each other countless times before, but this meeting felt entirely different. It was raw, emotional, and filled with a happiness that made them both laugh through their tears. Mike gently blamed her for not telling him the truth earlier, confessing how much he had missed her. "I'm so sorry I didn't recognize you sooner," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Sara, overwhelmed, could barely speak. Tears streamed down her face as she managed to whisper her fears. "I was so self-conscious back then," she admitted. "I was afraid I'd disappoint you, so I hid the truth." But Mike's eyes held no blame, only love. "You were always perfect to me," he said softly. "You were my first love, the one I've dreamed of every day and night." In that moment, all their doubts and insecurities vanished. The years of separation and misunderstanding were replaced by a love that was stronger than ever. They had finally found their way back to each other, and nothing else mattered. Say no to bullying. Choose love and kindness.